grace and mercy. And this morning I want to talk about grace, but I want you to understand the difference between grace and mercy. Mercy is what a woodpecker in our neighborhood got this morning. Because Mr. Woodpecker decided that at probably 5:30 that our gutter was a treasure trove of bugs. And so not only was he wasn't wrapping on a tree, that I could have lived with, but he's bang, 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 bang on the gutter in between our house and our neighbor's house, and it's just echoing. And if I would have had a slingshot or some heavier ammunition, I would have one less woodpecker here. It was loud and obnoxious. And the woodpecker lives. I hope he doesn't come back. Or at least I hope, if any of you can figure out why a woodpecker would be banging out a gun, please let me know. I'm just terribly fascinated. Grace is unmerited favor. And I got grace this week. Now, some of you have heard the saga of the car that I got from my mom and dad that broke down in Wisconsin when I was bringing it back from Ohio. And I didn't know how I was going to get back to Wisconsin and get it. And some folks in the church, Carl and Sherry actually, were coming through and they called me up on Tuesday and said, hey, can we pick up your car? And that was like, yeah. And God was very gracious in that, this was totally unexpected, it was undeserved, but it was greatly appreciated. And that's what grace is all about, is that God gives us things that we don't necessarily deserve. And God's grace comes to people in different ways at different times in their journeys. And last week we started to look at Genesis chapter 21. We looked at two people who got grace, Abraham and Sarah. But we didn't get a chance to finish up the story, and it's interesting that the writer gives more attention to Hagar and Ishmael than he does to the birth of Isaac. And so I'd like us to turn your Bibles, if you got them, to Genesis chapter 21, page 18 in the Pew Bible. And this morning I want us to see that God's grace comes to people at different phases and in different ways in their lives. And God's grace isn't one size fits all. It's something that comes to us at our point of need. And that's what makes it grace, because God responds to us. I'd like to begin, just read the passage to get our hearts set and understand it. And just to set the context, we've been looking at the life of Abraham. Abraham was called by God. He lived in southern Iraq. He went up the Tigris, Euphrates River, around the Fertile Crescent, and settled in what was known as Israel. He was promised that he was going to have a child, but it took 25 years from the time God said he's going to have this child to the time he had this child. And oh, by the way, he was 75 when God made the promise, and his wife Sarah was 65. So there's a little bit of a problem there. But God fulfills his promise. Sarah and Abraham have this child. In the meantime, Sarah, Abraham's wife, had said, let's try and have a kid with my maid Hagar. And they had this child named Ishmael. And I'm going to read the story beginning in Genesis 21, and then we'll make some observations about what God's doing. The child, that is Isaac, grew and was weaned. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham had a great feast. But Sarah saw the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had born to Abraham, was mocked. And she said to Abraham, get rid of the slave woman and her son. For that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of a maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way to wander in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat nearby, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What's the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him in Egypt. There are two things I want us to notice about God's grace coming to people. The first is that God is gracious to Hagar by defending the weak and the powerless. I read this story and feel great pangs for Hagar. She's the most sympathetic person in this story. For all we know, she's just doing her job. Her mistress, Sarah, says, I want you to have sexual relations with my husband so that we can have a child. This was one of the cultural features of the ancient Near East. This was nothing weird. This was a little different. It freaks us out. It's strange to us. But this was within the realm of normal, within the realm of possibility. So Hagar obeys and has this child, Ishmael, with Abraham. She hasn't done anything wrong. But now she's the object of Sarah's contempt. You notice in the text, Sarah can't even call her by her name. She's just this baby-making Egyptian woman, if you read between the lines of the text. And Sarah wants to get rid of her. Sarah wants to drive her out of the land. Probably Sarah is afraid that Ishmael is going to inherit what Abraham has worked so hard to obtain. Abraham is a rich man, and legally Ishmael is the heir. He's the firstborn. He has first claim. And so Hagar is driven out. And you can imagine what this meant to Abraham. Abraham has ties. Imagine the emotional ties between Abraham and Hagar. They've been married in essence. They've had this physical relationship that's gone on for we don't know how long before Hagar became pregnant. This is Abraham's flesh and blood, Ishmael.